She realized it in the third aisle. It wasn't a direct look nor a clear accusation. It was that heavy silence that accompanies racial prejudice when it tries to disguise itself as attention. Each of her steps echoed louder than usual, as if the floor itself was announcing her presence. The black woman took a deep breath, pretending not to notice, but something inside her had already understood everything. This was not a coincidence. It was yet another cruel chapter of the black struggle lived far from the cameras. The minutes passed slowly. 5, 10, 15. Always someone behind her, always a sideways glance, always the feeling of being measured, evaluated, judged. She pushed the cart with steady hands, while inside the humiliation grew like a knot impossible to untie. That brightly lit store seemed too small to hold so much racial prejudice, and too large for anyone to pretend they didn't see what was happening. She had lived this before, in other places, other stores. Other times when her skin color spoke before any words could. The difference was that, on that day, something felt different. Every product placed in the cart was not just an ordinary choice. It was a gesture loaded with memory, pain, and resistance. A real story of racial prejudice was being written there, among ordinary shelves and far from innocent looks. While the employees whispered, she wondered how long she would have to prove she belonged in that space, how long black skin would be treated as suspicious. She swallowed hard, feeling the old mix of anger and exhaustion. It wasn't just about her, it was about all the times black women and men were followed, watched, silenced. It was the black struggle happening in a subtle way, and for that very reason, even more cruel. And then something began to change. The cart was no longer empty. The looks became more attentive. The air grew heavy. No one there seemed prepared for what was about to happen, because what that black woman placed in the cart was not just an object. It was a symbol. And in a few minutes, the entire store would understand, too late, the weight of the racial prejudice they had chosen to ignore. Her name almost never mattered in these situations. To many people, she was just another black woman walking among the shelves, carrying on her shoulders a judgment she never asked for. But outside of there, far from that cold aisle, there was an entire life. She woke up early every day, faced crowded buses, worked double shifts, and still found the strength to smile when she got home. Her routine was marked by effort, dignity, and silence, the same silence that so often swallows the pain of racial prejudice. She learned early on not to react. She learned that raising her voice could turn into a threat, that questioning looks could turn into trouble. She grew up hearing advice that wasn't really advice but warnings. Be careful where you go in. Don't draw attention. Don't give them a reason. That was the unwritten handbook of the black struggle, passed down from generation to generation as an attempt at survival in a world that insists on distrusting skin color before any action. As she pushed the cart, old thoughts returned. She remembered the first time she was followed in a store, still young, not understanding why. She remembered the shame that wasn't hers, but that she was forced to feel. Each step in that supermarket seemed to pull those memories out, as if past and present were meeting there, forming yet another real story of racial prejudice that no one would write down, but that she would never forget. On the outside, she kept her face calm. On the inside, she was fighting a silent battle. It was the conflict between leaving to protect herself or staying so as not to give in, because giving up also hurts, and staying, even when it hurts, is sometimes an act of resistance. The black struggle doesn't only happen in protests or speeches, it happens in these small, suffocating moments where every choice comes at a high emotional cost. And while the minutes kept passing, something was forming inside her. It wasn't explosive anger, it was something deeper, more conscious, a silent decision that began to take shape with every crooked look, every watched step, every second of that invisible humiliation. The cart kept moving through the aisles, and no one there seemed to realize that this story was approaching a point of no return. She tried to change aisles, and they changed too. It wasn't discreet, it wasn't a coincidence. One employee pretended to organize the shelf next to her, another appeared a few meters behind. The distance was calculated, the gaze constant. They said nothing, but they said everything. Racial prejudice rarely needs words to hurt. It manifests in surveillance, in automatic suspicion, in the silent distrust that follows every step of the everyday black struggle. Keep an eye on her. The phrase came low, but clear enough. She heard it, pretended not to hear. Her heart raced, but her face remained steady. It was always like this. The world demanded that she be strong, controlled, polite, even when the humiliation was blatant. Inside, the thought echoed, "Not again. Why always me?" Another real story of racial prejudice was unfolding in front of dozens of people who chose not to see. She stopped in front of some random shelf. She picked up a product, placed it in the cart, felt the eyes burning her back, felt her throat go dry. She swallowed the anger as she had learned to do her whole life, because reacting could confirm the narrative they had created about her. Because in the cruel logic of racial prejudice, the victim has to prove all the time that she is guilty of nothing. "Can I help you?" The question came hard, without kindness. It wasn't an offer, it was a warning. She answered calmly, her voice too firm for someone being crushed inside. "I'm just shopping." The silence that followed was more aggressive than any insult. The employee didn't leave, he just stood there, watching, waiting, as if expecting a mistake, as if that black body were, by itself, a threat. The seconds dragged on. She felt the weight of the black struggle in that moment, not as a speech, but as exhaustion. The exhaustion of always having to be impeccable, correct, invisible. The cart now carried more than products. It carried years of sideways glances, closed doors, unjust suspicions. And every item placed there seemed to push that situation toward a dangerous limit. And then, something changed in the atmosphere. The whispers stopped for a moment. The steps behind her slowed. The looks became more attentive. No one yet understood what was happening, but everyone felt that this story of racial prejudice was about to spiral out of control. Because there were things in that cart that didn't fit the narrative they had built about her. The checkout went silent when she approached. It wasn't an ordinary silence. It was that uncomfortable, heavy silence that signals something is about to happen. The employees who had followed her for nearly 15 minutes were now closer. One crossed his arms, another pretended to check his phone. The security guard stopped right behind her. The entire store seemed to hold its breath. That black woman felt her whole body tense, not from fear but from exhaustion, the ancient exhaustion of the black struggle. "Ma'am, we need to check your cart." The phrase came without request, without respect, just suspicion. Racial prejudice was no longer subtle. It was direct, public, exposed. Some people looked curiously, others looked away. No one said anything. She nodded slowly, not because she agreed, but because she knew resisting at that moment would be used against her. Her heart pounded hard, not from guilt, but from the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in front of strangers. The first item was removed from the cart, then the second, then the third. All ordinary, all paid for, all correct. The mood began to shift. The suspicious look turned confused. The security guard frowned. The employee swallowed hard. But that still wasn't it. That still wasn't what really mattered. She watched in silence, feeling something different growing in her chest, not anger, but a strange calm, a certainty. Then she herself picked up the last item. She said nothing, just placed it carefully on the counter. The object seemed simple at first glance, but carried an impossible to ignore weight. The name printed on it said everything. It was a gift, a symbol, a gesture made with love, not crime. An item connected to life, to family, to memory. Something that dismantled in seconds the entire narrative built about her. The looks changed. The silence became deafening. Someone behind murmured, "My God." In that instant, everyone understood. Understood the mistake, understood the judgment, understood the racial prejudice they had normalized. That black woman wasn't stealing anything. She was preparing something far too important to be reduced to suspicion. And the weight of that real story of racial prejudice hit the store like an invisible punch. The employee didn't apologize. The security guard took a step back. The cashier avoided looking her in the eyes, because admitting the mistake would mean facing something bigger. The silent cruelty of the black struggle lived every day in ordinary places under banal justifications. She collected the item, put it back in the cart and took a deep breath. She didn't win, She didn't lose. She simply survived, with dignity. And as she left the store, no one had the courage to follow her. She walked out of the store without looking back, not out of pride, not out of victory, but because staying there would mean carrying a weight that was never hers. Outside, the air felt different, lighter. Still, her chest hurt. It wasn't complete relief. It was the silent pain of someone who had won yet another invisible battle of the black struggle, knowing others would still come. That experience didn't break her, but it left marks. Inside the store, life went on. Carts kept passing. Registers kept beeping. People kept shopping. But something had been broken in that place. The false normalcy of racial prejudice disguised as procedure. Because everyone saw, everyone understood. And even so, few would know how to explain how something so cruel could happen so commonly. She never told this story expecting applause. She told it because silence also hurts. Because there are thousands of real stories of racial prejudice that end like this, without formal justice, without apologies, without headlines. Just someone going home, trying to explain to herself why it still hurts so much to be seen as suspicious before being seen as human. That night, while putting away the groceries, she paused for a moment. She looked at the item almost no one had truly seen. It wasn't just something in the cart. It was proof that racial prejudice judges before understanding, accuses before knowing, wounds before asking. And even so, she moved forward. Because the black struggle is also this, continuing to live when the world insists on distrusting your existence. And now, the question is yours. How many times have you witnessed something like this and chosen silence? How many times has prejudice passed by you disguised as normal? If this story touched you, like the video. If it made you reflect, subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell stories that hurt, but that need to be heard.